Well, hello everyone, this is Joseph, and I'm coming to you with the scenes from the corner. This is the official podcast of Cartwright Corner Urban Homestead. And today, we're going to talk about Homestead Firsts. Well, you know, when you decide you're going to homestead, there's a lot of firsts that happen really after you've even done it for years. But in our case, we haven't been doing it for a long time. We've been doing it since 2019. So we still have a lot of firsts to go, but we still have a little bit of experience to help folks along the way, which is also exciting. But I'm going to share with you a few of the firsts this year that are, for Sarah and I, are really exciting. One of them is that we have changed our whole philosophy, our whole methodology, our whole practical outworking of what gardening looks like on our urban homestead. See, we've gone back to Eden. We were inspired by a man named Paul Gauchi. Paul Gauchi was tired of laboring and toiling so hard in his garden to feed his family. It was just constant. He was working so hard by the sweat of his brow, as the Bible says in Genesis. And he said, you know what? There's got to be a better way. And so he just went out in nature and he just started talking to God. And you know what? God started talking back. And as God spoke to him, he said, look at nature. If you look at everything on the ground, everything's got a covering. It's covered with leaves. It's covered with downed limbs. It's covered with green, low growing plants. The soil is covered. Wow. Suddenly, it was like a light went off inside of him, and he went back to his house, and he started using wood chips to cover up his soil around his plants. And a revolution began. Well, that's the film, Back to Eden. We were inspired to change everything to do it that way. See, last year, our soil got baked in the Texas summer sun. And it got hard on the top, and we couldn't really even see that the water was really seeping down in there. So we were watering it once, letting it soak in as best we could, and then watering again because it was ready to soak at that point. But we had a lot of runoff happening. And so now switching to this Back to Eden, where we're going to put the wood chips on top of our dirt, there's a number of benefits that happen with that. But one of them will be that the moisture will stay in the soil and around the roots of our plants as they grow and produce for us. That's one of the advantages. But wood chips also have another interesting and amazing benefit. See, when you put the wood chips on top of the soil, over time, those wood chips are not only feeding the soil with nutrients, but they are also going to break down themselves and build up the soil and ultimately turn into soil themselves. See, one of the things we love about the homesteading lifestyle is that we're not seeking to plant crops that just deplete the soil and then we add additives and chemicals and stuff like that. We're doing everything as natural as possible, and our goal is to actually build the soil up, to leave it better than we first found it. And so the wood chips themselves, as they break down, they build the soil up. And over time, our soil is going to get better and better and better. So this year is our first time to go back to Eden. Well, there's a second first that happened on the homestead this year. As those of you know who listen to this podcast and who watch us on Cartwright Corner on YouTube or who see us on Instagram know that we fostered 11 chickens from a family that was overwhelmed. Well, we were able to get 7 of those chickens rehomed to other places, and we decided to keep 4 of the 11. Well, as time went on over a couple of months, we found out that 2 of those 4 that we had chosen were indeed roosters. They started getting beautiful plumage, started getting taller than the other girls, and then lo and behold, we heard cock-a-doodle-doo. A lot louder than that, and a lot more, well, let's just say disturbing. See, we live in the city where you're not supposed to have roosters. You can have chickens, but you're not supposed to have roosters. And so, hearing the crowing was a beautiful sound. Indeed, growing up, when I heard it, it was always a sound that was music to my ears. But what's different with these 2 roosters that we ended up with was after the crowing, I heard it and said, "Oh, that's so beautiful." Then I had that sinking feeling that our neighbors might not think that that was the case. Well, after they started crowing, I went door to door to the neighbors beside and behind and let everybody know, hey, we are aware that we have roosters. And we're sure that you are aware that we have roosters. Well, everybody actually loved the noise and the sound, and that was great. But having those roosters was breaking city ordinance. Well, we don't want animal control coming down on us and writing us a ticket. So I decided, I think it's best that we harvest these 2 young roosters. Now, I loved having the roostosterone around the girls, if you will. I call it roostosterone, and I say that the girls have henstrogen. Estrogen, testosterone, I'm sure you get it. So yeah, I loved having the roostosterone around. That was great. Loved the sound. But I also knew that at some point I was going to need to learn how to harvest chickens for meat. And by harvest, I do mean taking their life, cutting them up, putting them in the freezer, and ultimately feeding them to our family. So I knew that with these roosters, that this was my chance. So I talked to my friend James from Elizabeth Anna's Urban Farm, and he said he would gladly teach me how to harvest these 2 rooster boys. So we loaded up the roosters, headed to Elizabeth Anna's, and now we have these 2 young roosters in our freezer. Now, I've already tasted the meat from one of them. One of them we kept whole, one of them we cut up into pieces, and I've had the breast meat out of the one that was cut up into pieces, and I can tell you this. It is completely different from anything I've had from the grocery store. Now, I've had farm-raised poultry before that I'm sure was equally as good. But there was something satisfying and even greater in the flavor, at least in my mind, knowing that these were 2 boys that we raised, that we harvested, and that we put in our freezer and cooked. We knew what went into their feed, how they were treated, and were real close to the whole process of processing them. And it made the experience of tasting them even more phenomenal. So that's another first for us on the homestead this year as we harvested our first 2 chickens. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that we definitely in the future want to get into meat chickens to harvest them to both fill our freezer and hopefully sell them through our homestead as well. Well, we've got another first, the third of the first. This year, not only have we changed our garden into back to Eden style gardening, but we have added trellises made from cattle panels this year. Last year, our cucumbers were growing on strings hung in between two T-posts, and they worked great. The cucumbers climbed up, they grabbed onto those strings with the little tendrils, and they held on for dear life, and they worked wonderfully. But from the beginning, Sarah and I had the desire to use cattle panels, which is basically welded wire fencing. We wanted to use those as trellises and be able to have them more permanent, and we could get them and move them around and use them for our garden instead. So we put up trellises this year, and for this spring, for our summer garden, we will have cucumbers growing on cattle panel trellis. We will also have tomatoes. We will have Chinese long beans, and we will also have loofah. Yes, loofah. You know what loofah is. Those little spongy things that you have in your shower that you use to exfoliate your skin. You put your soap on it and you use it to exfoliate your skin or your face. Yeah, loofah. So I was inspired a couple of months back by a family that I saw in Louisiana that grew loofah. And they get that loofah, and after they harvest it, they use the loofah for their own usage for exfoliation, but also they sell the loofah as loofah pads. So you can make your own loofah pads and sell them. So again, as a for-profit business, Cartwright Corner, we're always looking for ways to add money back to the homestead. Well, I'm going to see, hopefully this year, loofah grow up one of those new trellises that we put up in the garden. So I'm excited about the loofah. So that's another first. And then lastly, I'll just add a couple little first for us. We have been growing some herbs, not been crazy successful. We've had them in pots, and we have some herbs in some pots right now. But we decided that when we expanded our garden, that we would also expand our herbs. And so this year we planted herbs not only in pots, but we also planted them direct sowing the seeds into the new garden beds that we created. So up front, by our sidewalk that goes to our front door, we've got a whole section dedicated to herbs directly sown into a new bed that we created this year. So I'm excited to see what happens with herbs. Hopefully in our compost that we had delivered from Living Earth this year, we're going to have some beautiful herbs that we can dry and use in cooking throughout the year this year. Well, we've also got another first, a small one, but to me, it's big. See, I have become, some people know, some people don't, I have become #crazy marigold man. I love marigold flowers. For me, nothing says vegetable garden like having marigolds as your vigilant soldiers against certain types of bugs that might try to get on your squash. I love marigolds. I think they're beautiful. Our marigolds this last year were wonderful. And so we harvested some seeds out of some of those marigolds to be able to plant in our garden this year. Well, we have some of those marigolds that we harvested, the seeds, planted, and have the seedlings growing right now. Well, because I am the #crazy marigold man, I also got a couple of other varieties of marigold as well, and we have those seedlings growing, and they'll soon go in the garden beds next to our seedlings for our vegetables and our herbs as well. And one of those is the variety called the Cracker Jack marigold. I'm really excited about this one because it's got kind of like stripes in it, kind of a yellowish orange, and kind of a reddish maroon together in the same flower. So the first this year is that we're planting our own marigold seeds and have our own marigold seedlings from our seeds. I'm very excited about that. So it's my plan to keep harvesting out of our marigolds and the other two varieties that we have growing as well, to keep harvesting the seeds year after year after year until marigolds take over our whole property. Yeah, that's not really the plan. No, Sarah wouldn't like that if the marigolds took over the whole property, because we also have zinnias and we have sunflowers and we have nasturtiums as well that we're growing. But I want to put the marigolds, I always want to have my own marigolds, and I would love, as we get these seedlings and as they grow up, to be able to give marigolds away to our gardening friends. And maybe at some point, again, always looking for a way to add money back to the homestead, maybe we could sell marigold seedlings each spring. So we'll see what happens with #CrazyMarigoldMan. Will I stay motivated? We shall see. So those are some of the first on the homestead this year. I hope it's enjoyable to you guys to hear about this, and I hope you too are having your own experiences, first time and otherwise, this year. So I want to continue to encourage you, get your hands in the dirt, plant you some seed, and watch what comes up out of the ground. It never, ever, ever gets old.